This video shows how to create the iOS application for the Notifier challenge. Click Create a new Xcode project. Make sure you selected iOS application and then select Single View application. For the product name, if you follow the guide with regard to how to name projects for challenges for submission to the class, it should be the paw print with the first letter uppercased followed by the name of the challenge or the project name. So I am MustardDA for my paw print, and the project name is Notifier. So this would be your paw print, first letter uppercased, and then Notifier with N uppercased after the paw print. Organizational name, according to the guide on naming things, should be your name, so it'll be Dale Musser, and the organizational identifier edu.missouri.cs, which gives us a bundle identifier of edu Missouri CS, and then the product name MustardDA Notifier. Language Swift. Device universal. We're going to have core data checked, and we're not going to include unit tests. Click Next. I have a folder created for all of my iOS projects called iOS Projects. Select it. I don't need a Git repository, although if you want to create one, that's fine. So I'm going to uncheck this and then say Create. I'm ready to begin developing my application. According to the guidelines in the challenge, that is in the requirements, I need a user interface that contains a label and two buttons. So it says create a user interface, auto layout constraints. The interface is contain a label and two buttons. One button is labeled with the word notify, the other is labeled with the word clear. When the notify button is tapped, you have been notified is to be displayed. So we have some information about the layout. The label and both buttons are to be centered horizontally. The notify button 60 points down from the top space to the top layout guide. Clear button 30 points down from the notify button. The labels 50 points down from the clear button. So first, we're going to place a notify button. So in my view controller, with this right panel open, with the object library displayed, I'm going to search for a button. Going to drag the button into the view controller, centered, that is, I see the dotted blue line, and some distance down from the top. This button is to say notify, so I can double click on it and I can enter the word notify. You can also select the button and change the name of it here in the right panel to notify. This is supposed to be 60 points below the top space to the top layout guide. So with the button selected, Control click drag vertically and select vertical spacing to top layout guide. A blue line represents that constraint. If I double click on it, I can change that number to the number from the requirements, which is 60. Notice this is displayed in orange. This means this isn't actually where it is. So I can go to my update frames, and this is where it actually is. So I clearly am missing something. I only set one of the constraints. I only set the distance down from the top layout guide. The other part of the constraint was that the label and both buttons are supposed to be centered horizontally. So I'm going to edit, undo, update frames. Click to select notify. Control click drag vertically and select center horizontally in container. Now when I select update frames, Notify is centered horizontally, and it is 60 points down from the top. Next, we are to have a clear button that's 30 points down from the Notify button. So again, with a button available to us in the library, I'm going to drag the button centered and below Notify. And I'm going to control-click drag from the button to Notify so that I can set two constraints. One is the vertical spacing, and the other is to center horizontally. And since I'm making two constraints, I'm going to hold the Shift key down to make the first one. When I do that, I can select vertical spacing, add constraints appears. And because I held Shift on making that first selection, I can make a second selection, which is center horizontally. These are the two constraints I want to add, so I say Add Constraints. If I double-click on the blue line between that button and Notify, I find that I'm 22 points down from the top, and the document says to be 30 points down, so I'm going to change that to 30. The other place that I could change this is if I could go to the ruler, you'll find that the constraints we placed are listed here. And if I were to double click on that, that's where I could enter 30. So that is a second option. And you'll also notice that if we select that button, we have constraints over here, and each one of these is the constraints we set so far. And here we have the one that is button top to Notify, and I'm going to drag this over a little bit. Button top equals Notify bottom plus 30. That represents the 30, and again, if you'd select this over here, which one is selected changes. If I were to select the button and that information isn't available and I just click here, it doesn't display here until I select the ruler. So typically here though, I would just double click on this line and set it to 30. The name of the second button is Clear. So I double clicked in here so I could make it editable, and then I type Clear. And then finally, the label is to be 50 points down from the Clear button. So I'm going to find Label in my library, place the label beneath the two buttons. I'm going to control-click drag from the label to the Clear button, hold the Shift key to get my vertical spacing from the Clear button and to center it horizontally, then click Add Constraints. If I double click on that line, it's currently 45 points down. I want to make it 50 points down so it meets the requirements. So we have two buttons and a label. And so the next step is to connect the actions on these two buttons to IB actions in the associated view controller and to create an IB outlet for the label. To do that, I'm going to just make my window a little bigger here. I'm going into the assistant editor, that is the two circles. I can make this piece a little smaller, or I can even make it go away. I'm using my trackpad to slide this a little bit horizontally, and I can now see the view controller code that goes with this view controller. So now I'm going to create IB actions for the Notify and Clear button. So I'm going to select the Notify button, place my mouse in the center, hold the Control key down, and then click and drag inside the view controller, below the other functions that are already there. Leave up. I don't want to create an outlet. I want to create an action. So I select action. And that is an action on a touch up inside, which is what we normally get when we tap on a button. That is, we tap and lift our finger off while it's still on the button. And according to the requirements, the name of the function should be notify. So I say connect. So there is our IB action for when notify is tapped. Do this again for clear. Control click drag to here. Not an outlet, but an action. And we then name it clear. So now we have an IB action for clear, and I'm adding an extra space so I have room to write code within the functions. Then I need an IB outlet to the label. So I'm going to select the label, then hold the control key down, click and drag to inside the class, but above the other functions. Leave up. I do want an outlet, and according to my document, this is to be named, let's see, we have notify, notify, clear, clear, and the IB outlet for the label is to be called message. So we're going to call this message. Say connect, create some white space around it. So the IB outlet is a variable called message that is a reference to a UI label object, exclamation point we'll talk about later, but that is a auto unwrapped optional. So we're going to be able to use message to reference the label. So inside of notify, we can say message.text equals, have some quotes here, and the actual phrase is you have been notified, exclamation point. So I'm going to copy that, paste it right there. And it says, when the clear button is tapped, the label is to be cleared of its contents. That is set to an empty string. So we'll say message.text equal quote, quote. So a question I have is, right now label has the word label in it. What should we do about that? I don't know that we have any mention of that here. Let's see. Again, auto layout constraints, a label and 2 buttons, notify and clear on the buttons. When we tap notify, you have been notified. When the clear button's tapped, the labels be cleared of its contents. Notify is to be called notify. Clear is to be called clear. And the IB outlet for label is message. We did that. Centered, 60 points down from the top layout guide, 30 points below it, 50 points down from the clear button. So there's no mention of what to do with label, but if we're going to be reasonable about this, I don't think anything ought to be displayed until notify is tapped. So I'm going to choose here to double click on the label and hit delete, and the label doesn't have anything in it. And I waited till the end to do that because you notice it looks like the label's disappeared. We can actually find that label again. If I control click drag, we can see that it's present somewhere there. The other place to find it is to open up the view controller scene itself, and there's the button, and there we have the label. But because the label has no contents in it, it's very, very small. But I could still, for example, select the label here and put text in it over here. So, and the reason, by the way, that text didn't appear is we have an orange box. If I said update frames, that would appear then. But when there's nothing in it, and it shrinks down to its tiny size. I'm going to do an update frames again. It is really of 0 size because it automatically becomes the size of its content. And that's what I really want for this app. Although I'm not going to call it wrong if the word label was left in there. So if I now run the application, now my phone looks awfully big, but I can make it smaller. So I could say here scale down to 50%. And now my simulated iPhone 6s Plus is launching. And my app is being run. And I have the notify button. I tap it. You have been notified. I tap clear. It clears it. Tap notify. You've been notified. Tap clear. It clears it. I can rotate right. My notify button is still 60 points down from the top layout guide. Clear is still 30 points from notify. When I click notify, the label is still 50 points down from the clear. And this works just fine here. So we can quit the simulator. We have our finished application. To submit it, I go find the project. I right click on it. If you have the right click enabled on your trackpad or your mouse, if you don't, you can hold the control key and click and select compress. And this is the zip file that is to be submitted on Canvas.